After being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had to learn to survive by the sweat of their own labor, without the abundance of fruits they had in the garden. Years passed, and Eve became pregnant with her first child, whom she named Cain. When Cain was born, Eve said,
"I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord."
Eve probably thought Cain would be the Messiah who would save humanity, for God had said that Eve's descendants would bruise the serpent's head. However, after Cain's birth, Eve became pregnant again and had another son, whom she named Abel. If you are watching this video, you probably already know this story. But did you know there is a story very similar to that of Cain and Abel, written 1600 years before Moses wrote Genesis? In this video, we will compare the story of Dumuzi and Enkimdu from the Sumerian texts with the story of Cain and Abel from the biblical Genesis. Could the story of Cain and Abel be a copy? In my opinion, no. But I'll leave that explanation for the end of the video. And I want you to tell me your opinion after watching until the end. First, let's start with the story of Cain and Abel. Let's remember what happened in the story recounted in the book of Genesis, chapter 4. Cain, the firstborn of Adam and Eve, became a dedicated farmer, probably following the example of his father Adam, who had already learned the art of planting. Abel, his younger brother, chose to be a shepherd, caring for his flock with dedication. The brothers, although different in their vocations, lived side by side, each fulfilling his role in the new life outside Eden. One day, the brothers decided to offer sacrifices to God. Cain brought the fruits of his harvest, while Abel presented the best lambs from his flock, offering the fat of the firstborn. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but did not accept Cain's. Feeling rejected and consumed by envy, Cain let anger take over his heart. God, perceiving Cain's anguishness, spoke to him.
"Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it."
Despite the divine warning, Cain's bitterness grew. He called Abel to go out to the field, and when they were there, Cain attacked his brother and killed him. It was an unprecedented act of violence, the first fratricide in human history, an event that would forever mark the relationship between brothers and human nature. The Lord then asked Cain,
"Where is your brother Abel?"
Cain replied,
"I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?"
God, knowing the truth, said,
"What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed and banished from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand."
The ground, which had previously produced abundantly for Cain, now refused to give its strength. Cain, condemned to wander as a fugitive and vagabond, bore the weight of his crime and the divine curse. But 1600 years before Moses wrote this text, the Sumerians were writing the poem Dumuzi and Enkimdu. In the poem, Dumuzi, the shepherd, was known for his beauty and skill in tending the flocks. He was worshipped as the god of vegetation and fertility, bringing life and prosperity to the people through his dominion over nature. Enkimdu, on the other hand, was the god of irrigation and agriculture, ensuring abundant harvests and fertile fields. Both played essential roles in the lives of the ancient Sumerians, and their responsibilities reflected the different forms of subsistence in Mesopotamia. One day, the beautiful goddess Inanna, goddess of love and war, caught the interest of the two gods. Both Dumuzi and Enkimdu desired to win her favor and her hand in marriage. Thus began an intense rivalry between the two, each trying to prove he would be the better partner for Inanna. Dumuzi, with his charm and persuasion, extolled the pastoral life. He spoke of the freedom of the fields, the beauty of the flocks grazing under the sun, and the tranquility of the hills. Enkimdu, in turn, highlighted the advantages of agriculture. He spoke of the security of the harvests, the abundance of grain, and the stability provided by irrigation. Inanna, fascinated by both, decided she would listen to each one's arguments before making her decision. Dumuzi extolled his ability to provide meat, milk, and wool, arguing that his lifestyle was more vibrant and connected to nature. Enkimdu, with his patience and wisdom, argued that his work in agriculture was more sustainable and essential for long-term survival. The tension between Dumuzi and Enkimdu increased as each tried to outdo the other. However, unlike the tragedy of Cain and Abel, this rivalry did not culminate in mortal violence. Enkimdu, recognizing Dumuzi's passion for Inanna, eventually yielded and accepted their union. The oldest accounts of the book of Genesis, where we find the story of Cain and Abel, are difficult to date precisely, but scholars generally agree that the biblical texts as we know them today were compiled and written around the 6th century BCE during the Babylonian exile, although they contain older oral and written traditions. The story of Dumuzi and Enkimdu, as part of Sumerian mythology, was written in texts dating from around 2100-2000 BCE. These texts predate the biblical texts that record the story of Cain and Abel. This leads some critics of the Bible to say that Sumerian mythology influenced many later cultures in the Mesopotamian region, including the Babylonian culture, which in turn had a significant impact on the biblical texts. But why do I disagree with this? Sumerian myths, like many ancient myths, were initially transmitted orally before being recorded in writing. The stories of Dumuzi and Enkimdu, as well as other Sumerian tales, were part of a rich oral tradition passed down from generation to generation. Eventually, these tales were compiled and written on clay tablets using cuneiform script. So, we cannot discount that the Sumerian myth is true just because it was written before the book of Genesis. Interestingly, many critics say that the story of Genesis is a myth, but to disqualify the Bible as a historical account, they validate another myth because it is older. As a Christian, I believe in the Adamic tradition, the idea that Adam and Eve passed down their story orally from generation to generation. The descendants of Cain turned away from God's presence, and over time, their stories transformed into myths. On the other hand, the descendants of Seth followed God's teachings and preserved the true story of Adam and Eve, passed down through generations until it reached Moses, who wrote it in Genesis. This is my opinion, but it is up to you, the viewer, to decide what to believe. Leave your comment. Do you believe that the story of Cain and Abel was real? And in the next video, we will talk about the mark of Cain. What was this mark? Is it true that it was the color of his skin? And another question, who was Cain's wife? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video, and leave your like so that this video can reach more people. See you in the next video.